Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. Your support means the world. The CEO's regret, a second chance at love. She told him she loved him. He said nothing. 18 months later, he saw her holding their baby. That's how it started. A moment that would forever haunt Arthur Sterling, the quintessential self-made billionaire. At 30 Kidoi, Arthur was the untouchable CEO of InnovateX, a tech titan he'd built from the ground up in the bustling heart of New York City. His life was a meticulously crafted fortress of discipline, focus, and an absolute silence when it came to anything resembling emotion. He commanded respect and fear from everyone in his orbit. He was a force of nature, efficient, precise, serene. There were no accidents in his life, only calculated decisions. Or so he believed, until Clara Jennings walked into his office and shattered every single one of those certainties. Clara was hired as a media consultant, brought in to refresh the company's public image. She was young, incredibly sharp, and unsettlingly perceptive. Unlike the parade of sycophants who usually sat before him, Clara didn't try to impress or flatter him. She listened intently, spoke with unwavering honesty, and somehow managed to challenge him without ever being disrespectful. That, more than anything, caught his attention. He started calling her into meetings she technically didn't need to attend, just to observe her reactions. She always arrived prepared, always composed, yet with a quiet spark that ignited even the most tedious strategy sessions. At first, he dismissed it as mere curiosity. Then he realized it was something entirely beyond his control. Their connection wasn't born from fireworks or grand gestures. It was a slow, subtle weaving. Late-night work sessions morphed into shared dinners. Casual good work emails evolved into inside jokes. And then, without either of them realizing how deeply the thread had woven, it became undeniable. For Clara, it was terrifying and exhilarating. For Arthur, it was a profound violation of his most sacred rule: never mix personal with professional. Yet, he let it happen, until the moment she uttered the words he dreaded most. It was after a long, rainy Thursday, the kind that draped the city in a muted gray. They had just finished an exhausting presentation, and she lingered after everyone else had cleared out of the boardroom. She was nervous, clearly, but composed. She looked him directly in the eye and said softly, "Arthur, I think I love you." He didn't move. He didn't even blink. Inside, 1,000 alarms blared. His chest tightened. His mind raced. But on the outside, he was utterly silent. She waited. Seconds stretched into an eternity. Still nothing. Finally, she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, as if to herself, and said, "Okay, I suppose that's all I needed to know." The very next morning, she submitted her resignation. No dramatic reason, just personal clarity and a polite thank you to the team. He didn't stop her. He didn't even acknowledge the letter. Instead, he watched her walk out of the building with her box of belongings, head held high, gaze fixed forward. He told himself it was the right thing to do, that he was protecting her, that he wasn't the kind of man who belonged in a world of words like love and forever. But that night, he stood in his penthouse, surrounded by luxury and suffocating silence, and felt something he hadn't felt in years: profound regret. Do you think Arthur's silence was a deliberate choice or a reflex born from fear? What would you have done if you were Clara in that moment? Clara didn't look back as she exited the imposing glass edifice that had been her world for nearly a year. The crisp early autumn air bit at her skin as she stepped onto the bustling street, her arms wrapped tightly around the cardboard box holding the remnants of her time at InnovateX. A picture frame, a favorite mug, a pen she always kept in her blazer pocket. Things that once signified routine, structure, even pride. Now they felt hollow. She had walked away from a position many would have fought tooth and nail to keep, from a company overflowing with power and prestige. But mostly, she had walked away from him. She had never planned on falling for Arthur Sterling. At first, he'd been nothing more than a high-level name in her email threads, a voice she occasionally heard on quarterly reports. But as they began working more closely, she saw beyond the headlines and intimidating suits. Beneath the CEO's polished facade was a man who, despite his brilliance, seemed constantly at war with his own feelings. He sought opinions, but hated being questioned. He admired honesty, but recoiled from vulnerability. And somehow, in the cracks between those contradictions, she found herself drawn in. When she told him she loved him, she hadn't been looking for a declaration in return. She hadn't expected a grand gesture. All she wanted was acknowledgement, something real, something human. But his silence was deafening. It wasn't just that he didn't love her. It was that he didn't even try to understand what her words meant. That silence told her everything she needed to know, so she resigned. Not to punish him, but to free herself. She packed quickly that night and left the apartment she'd rented in the city. Her sister Beth lived in a quiet town 2 hours north, in a small house surrounded by trees that were just beginning to turn golden with autumn. Clara had always loved visiting there, and now it felt like the only place she could breathe. She drove in silence, her phone on airplane mode, wanting no last-minute messages or attempts at false closure. Arthur wouldn't contact her. She knew it, and even if he did, it would be too late. In Beth's guest room, she unpacked slowly. No rush, no meetings, no schedule. Just the tick-tock of the old clock on the wall and the gentle whisper of the wind outside the window. She slept for 12 straight hours that first night, exhausted not just from leaving her job, but from everything she'd held inside for months. 2 weeks later, her nausea started. At first, she dismissed it. Stress, probably, or maybe the change of air. But when it didn't go away, she bought a test. She didn't tell Beth what she was doing. She just locked the bathroom door and stared at the stick in her trembling hands. 2 pink lines. Positive. Her knees nearly buckled. She sat on the cold tile floor for a long time, the test in her lap, tears silently tracing paths down her face. Not because she was sad, not because she felt ashamed, but because she didn't know how to feel at all. The weight of the moment was so massive it flattened every emotion. This wasn't just about her anymore. Her entire life had changed without warning. She didn't call Arthur. She thought about it. More than once. She even drafted a message on her phone. But the image of him in that boardroom, his face perfectly still as she poured out her heart, haunted her. If he couldn't say anything then, what would he say now? Would he believe her? Would he accuse her of trying to manipulate him? Or worse, would he offer cold, contractual support? She didn't want that. Her child didn't deserve that. She closed the message and never sent it. Beth noticed, of course. One evening, as they watched a movie, Clara got up to discreetly be sick in the bathroom. When she returned, pale and tired, Beth paused the screen. "You're pregnant, aren't you?" Clara nodded slowly, her lips pressed into a thin line. Beth didn't ask who. She just pulled her into a hug and whispered, "You're going to be okay." In the weeks that followed, Clara began to rebuild from scratch. She started freelancing from home, doing copywriting, translation, writing essays under a pseudonym. It didn't pay much at first, but it gave her purpose. She began prenatal appointments with a kind local doctor and watched her body change in ways that felt both terrifying and miraculous. She thought about Arthur more than she wanted to. Every time she felt a kick, every time she saw the ultrasound monitor light up, she wondered if he would have been moved, if he would have cried, if he would have held her hand and whispered apologies he didn't know how to give. But she let those thoughts drift away. She had to. Months passed. Her belly grew, and so did her strength. When her daughter was born, after a long, painful labor, the room went completely silent for a second before the baby's cry pierced through it. Clara looked into those piercing blue eyes and knew instantly there was no denying who her father was. She named her Lily. No middle name. No family name from him. Just Lily, hers, completely hers. Lily's birth marked a new chapter for Clara. What do you think are the biggest challenges a single mother faces, and how might Clara overcome them? Share your thoughts below. Lily was 5 months old when the world around Clara finally began to slow down. The chaotic rush of new motherhood, the sleepless nights, the endless feedings, the dizzying mix of awe and fear, had settled into a rhythm that was equally exhausting and beautiful. The quiet town where Beth lived became her sanctuary. In the mornings, Clara would carry Lily, wrapped in a soft blanket, and sit on the back porch with a warm cup of tea, watching the sun filter through the changing leaves. Lily would coo and wave her tiny hands at the wind, fascinated by the birds, the trees, and the play of light on the grass. Beth had converted the small sunroom into a nursery, painting one wall pale lavender and adding shelves for the few books and toys Clara had collected. It wasn't extravagant, but it was warm, safe. The space smelled faintly of lavender oil and baby lotion, and sometimes, when Lily napped on her chest, Clara would close her eyes and pretend the outside world didn't exist. Work was steady enough to get by. Clara had landed a few reliable clients and found solace in her late-night writing sessions after Lily was asleep. Her writing was thoughtful, sometimes raw, and though she wrote under a pseudonym, it gained traction. Comments poured in from women who saw themselves in her, who had left something heavy behind and were learning to live again. She never mentioned Arthur by name, never told the full story, but fragments of it were there, scattered between lines about heartbreak, silence, and the choice to move forward, even when nothing made sense. Despite everything, she had no regrets about keeping the pregnancy to herself. She didn't want Lily to grow up as someone's secret, or worse, someone's guilt. She wanted her to be loved, openly and fully. And if that love came only from her, so be it. Still, there were moments, sharp and silent, when she would look into her daughter's bright blue eyes and feel a deep ache in her chest. Lily had his eyes. There was no escaping that. Every time Clara saw them, it reminded her of the moment she confessed her love and was met with silence. It reminded her of the life they never had and the man who had let her slip through his fingers. Occasionally, Beth would suggest contacting him, especially on nights when Lily had a fever or when Clara seemed particularly exhausted. But Clara would always shake her head. What if he doesn't want to know? She'd ask. What if he resents her? Beth never had a good answer, and so they carried on, together. 2 sisters and a tiny girl, building a new version of family. Clara tried not to Google him, but sometimes she couldn't help it. Arthur Sterling continued to pop up in the news, photographed at conferences, featured in interviews, quoted in Forbes and Tech World. He looked the same in every photo, precise, impeccable, cold. She wondered if he ever thought of her, if he ever remembered that night in the boardroom when she had said 3 words and he had said nothing. It haunted her, Not because she wanted to go back, but because a part of her still couldn't understand how someone so intelligent could be so emotionally blind. One late October afternoon, Clara bundled Lily in her softest sweater dress and headed for a local harvest fair. It was a modest event held in the town square with warm cider, pumpkins, and a few stalls raising money for local schools and shelters. Beth had been volunteering there and invited her to come help organize. Clara agreed, thinking it might be good for her to be around people again. The evening air was crisp, and Lily laughed happily in her baby carrier, her tiny hands reaching out for the string lights and paper lanterns. The scent of cinnamon and wood smoke filled the air, and for the first time in weeks, Clara felt almost normal. People smiled at her, asked about Lily, complimented her eyes. Clara thanked them and moved on quickly. One woman said, "Those eyes, so blue, just like her father's, I'll bet." Clara paused for a split second, then smiled and replied, "She got lucky." That night, after Lily was asleep, Clara sat on the nursery floor and cried. It wasn't a breakdown, or even truly sadness. It was grief, a silent, private grieving for a connection that could never be, for a man who would never know the sound of his daughter's laugh, or the way she scrunched her forehead when trying to roll over, and also for herself, for the part of her that even now wished he had said something when it mattered most. But then Lily stirred in her crib and let out a sleepy sigh, and Clara wiped her tears. She stood up and whispered, "We're okay, baby. We're more than okay." Because in the absence of what could have been, Clara had built something whole, something peaceful, something real. Do you think Clara was right not to tell Arthur about Lily? Why or why not? Comment below and let's discuss. The gala was never something Arthur Sterling looked forward to, but he always attended. As CEO of one of the country's most visible and powerful tech companies, he knew public appearances mattered. His team expected him to work the room, shake hands with donors, pose for press photos, and deliver a few polished remarks about innovation and philanthropy. He'd done it before, hundreds of times. Usually, it was effortless, but tonight, something in the air felt off. It wasn't the elegant lighting, the orchestra playing in the corner, or the scent of champagne and wealth that filled the luxurious ballroom. It was something he couldn't name, a restlessness in his chest he hadn't felt in years. He moved through the crowd, exchanging practiced smiles, answering questions without truly hearing them, nodding when he was supposed to. His assistant, Diane, was trying to keep him moving, whispering names and reminders in his ear, but he suddenly stopped, completely unprompted, turning his head towards the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. She was there. Clara. She wasn't supposed to be here. Not in this world. Not in this city. Not this close. She stood in a deep sapphire dress that clung to her figure with quiet grace, her light brown hair loosely gathered over one shoulder. And in her arms, nestled against her chest, was a baby no more than 6 months old. The child had wisps of dark hair and large, clear eyes. Blue eyes that hit Arthur like a punch to the chest. For a moment, the noise around him vanished. He couldn't hear the music, the chatter, the clinking of glasses. He only saw them, Clara and the baby, framed by the golden lights of the city skyline. Diane said something, but he didn't respond. He pulled away from her without explanation and walked across the room with slow, deliberate strides. His mind raced with questions he wasn't ready to form. She hadn't seen him yet. She was gently swaying the baby, talking to her in a soft murmur, completely oblivious to the impact she was having just by existing in that space. When he finally reached her, his voice came out softer than he intended. "Clara." She turned. For a fraction of a second, there was something raw in her expression. Surprise, hesitation, and something else he couldn't name. But it quickly vanished, replaced by a serene calm. "Arthur," she said naturally, as if they were two acquaintances bumping into each other at a grocery store. He couldn't tear his eyes from the child in her arms. "She's yours," she said simply, without ceremony, without preamble. "And no, I wasn't going to tell you. It wasn't accusatory. It wasn't bitter. It was just honest." He swallowed hard. "Why?" Her eyes, those deep brown eyes that once held so much hope, searched his face for a moment. "Because I told you I loved you, and you said nothing." She needed to be protected from silence like that. Arthur felt a knot in his stomach. The weight of what she said hit him with full force. The silence he had used as a shield back then had become a wall keeping him from his own daughter. He took a breath. "Can we talk somewhere?" "I'm here at a friend's invitation," she said. "This isn't the place." He nodded slowly. "Would you let me see her? Just for a moment." Clara hesitated. Then, gently, she adjusted the blanket covering the baby's small body and angled her slightly towards him. The baby blinked up at him with impossibly blue eyes and yawned. "What's her name?" he asked, startled to hear his own voice crack. "Lily," Clara replied. "No middle name." He reached out instinctively but stopped midway. Clara noticed and nodded once. "You can hold her," she said softly, "but not for long." With trembling hands, Arthur took the baby into his arms. She was so small, so warm. Her fingers curled around his thumb, and a wave of emotion washed over him so powerfully he had to close his eyes. In that moment, every late night at the office, every repressed instinct, every controlled decision, it all seemed absurd. This child existed. She was real, and he had missed everything. He handed her back carefully, afraid his hands would betray the storm in his chest. "I didn't know," he whispered. "If I had known." She cut him off gently. "But you didn't ask, not once. You never reached out. You didn't wonder what happened after I left. And you lived with that." He wanted to argue, to tell her how often he had thought of her, how many nights he'd stared at her number in his phone, too ashamed to call. But what would that change now? "I'm not here to fight," he said. After a long silence, I need time to process, to understand." "You don't get to process," she said calmly. "You can be in her life, Arthur, if you want, but only if you show up. Not later, not when it's convenient. She doesn't need a ghost. She needs presence." He nodded, overwhelmed. "I want to try, if you'd let me." "Trying isn't enough," she said, "but it's a start." She shifted Lily in her arms and turned to leave. Before she walked away, she stopped. She looked over her shoulder and said, "You know where to find us, but we won't wait." Arthur stood there, motionless, as the crowd resumed its movement around him. The orchestra played something light and cheerful, and the chandelier glittered overhead. But his world had shifted, and for the first time in years, Arthur Sterling was not in control. Do you believe Arthur's sudden change of heart is genuine, or just a reaction to seeing his daughter? What would it take for Clara to truly trust him again? Share your insights. Arthur didn't sleep the night after the gala. He sat in his apartment, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows and a skyline that suddenly felt meaningless. The city lights twinkled far below, but all he could see were her eyes, the way Clara had looked at him with calm, quiet strength, not with anger, not with despair, but with something worse, finality. And Lily, that tiny child with his eyes. Her hand had wrapped around his thumb, barely larger than a petal. But that small touch had detonated something inside him he didn't know how to name. He had spent years building a fortress of silence, of logic, of power. But in that moment, with a child in his arms and a woman he once loved looking straight through him instead of at him, all the defenses crumbled. He was so certain he was protecting her by not responding. He told himself that love wasn't real, that his presence would only complicate things. But the truth was more cowardly. He was afraid. And now he had missed the first smile, the first laugh, the first time Lily had opened her eyes. The next morning, he did something he hadn't done in over a decade. He cleared his schedule without reason. Diane protested, confused by his sudden disappearance from meetings and calls, but he gave no explanation. There was nothing to explain that could be put into words yet. He found Clara's name in an old HR file. She had listed her sister's town as a backup contact address. It was a long shot, but it was something. 2 hours later, he was in a car, watching the city give way to long roads, trees, and quiet neighborhoods that bore no resemblance to the world he lived in. When he pulled up to the small house with the white porch, he sat there for a long time, engine off, unsure what he was going to do. He wasn't used to knocking on doors without control, without a reason that benefited him. He wasn't used to being the one asking. Beth opened the door, and for a moment her expression told him she knew exactly who he was. She didn't smile, but she wasn't hostile either. "She's out back," Beth said after a long pause. With Lily, Clara was sitting on a blanket in the grass. Lily was propped on her back, kicking at the air, babbling in soft, joyful tones. The sun framed them both, and Arthur was struck by how complete they looked, how peaceful. He approached slowly, his hands trembling in a way that shamed him. When Clara saw him, she didn't seem surprised. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said. "I didn't know how not to," he replied. She glanced at Lily. "She doesn't know who you are yet. You're a stranger to her." "I want to change that," he said, "but not on my terms, on yours, on hers." Clara studied him for a moment, then nodded towards the edge of the blanket. "Sit," he did. For the next hour, he watched her with Lily. He observed how naturally she moved, how she spoke to the baby as if she were a whole person, with opinions and needs that mattered. When Clara finally handed Lily to him again, she stayed close, but didn't interfere. Lily didn't cry, didn't resist. She looked at him with curiosity, her small hand reaching out for his neck. He couldn't hold back the tears that welled up. Clara didn't react. She just watched. "You can't just show up," she said softly, "and disappear from her life. If you're in, you're in. Diapers, bottles, bedtime stories, sicknesses, first words, not just birthdays." "I know," Arthur said. "I'm not here to play a role. I'm here to be a father, if you'll let me." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she leaned back on her elbows and looked up at the sky. "I don't trust you," she said finally. "Not yet." "I don't expect you to," he replied. "I just hope to earn it, one day at a time." He stayed until sunset, helping to fold the blanket, holding Lily while Clara put away her toys. He didn't try to overstay. He didn't ask questions she wasn't ready to answer. When he left, she simply said, "Tomorrow at 10, if you're serious." And he was. He showed up the next morning at 10 o'clock sharp, and the day after, and the day after that. He changed diapers with fumbling hands. He learned how to warm a bottle. He held Lily when she was fussy, and learned which song calmed her when nothing else worked. Every night, when he left, he felt a little less like a stranger. And every night, Clara would sit by the window, watching him go, wondering how a man who was once so far from love was slowly, steadily, learning to walk towards it. By the third week, Arthur had settled into the daily rhythm, no longer just an occasional visitor or a curious presence on the fringes of their lives. He arrived every morning at 10, no matter the weather, no matter how busy his inbox became overnight. At first, Clara remained guarded, watching his every move with silent skepticism, half expecting him to flinch or withdraw when things became inconvenient or emotionally complex. But he didn't. He stayed. He held Lily through teething cries. He paced with her through the mid-morning fussiness and patiently learned to distinguish between the different tones of her babbling. His suits started to change. At first, he wore his usual tailored jackets, crisp and perfect shirts. But soon they gave way to soft sweaters, rolled-up sleeves, jeans with baby drool on the thighs. His hair, once always slicked back perfectly, grew a little longer, curling slightly at the ends. The change didn't make him seem less powerful. It made him seem real, human. Someone Clara almost didn't recognize. What surprised her most wasn't that he adapted. It was how quickly Lily responded to him. She started reaching for him. When he walked into the room, her face would light up with that gummy, open-mouthed smile that parents live for. She would squeal when he made funny faces. She'd pat his cheeks when he lay on the floor next to her. And she would cling to his shirt when he carried her on long afternoon walks through the trees behind the house. There was one afternoon that stood out more than the others. Lily had just woken from a nap, her cheeks flushed and her hair tousled in every direction. Clara was warming a bottle in the kitchen, and when she walked into the living room, she found Arthur on the floor with Lily in his lap. He was softly singing an old lullaby, one she hadn't heard since childhood, his voice quiet and a little rough. Lily's head was nestled against his chest, her tiny fingers curled into the fabric of his sweater. He didn't realize she was watching until he turned his head, and their eyes met. Neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't awkward. It was full of meaning. That image stayed with her all day, and well into the night. Later, Clara sat alone on the porch, arms wrapped around her knees, and tried to reconcile the man she once knew with the man who now returned each day. She remembered what it felt like to tell him, "I love you," and be met with silence, a wall of distance that had nearly broken her. But the man who came now didn't hide behind silence. He spoke with actions, with presence, with the quiet, undeniable truth of consistency. Still, the wound hadn't fully healed. A part of her clung to it because she didn't know how to let go of something that had changed her so profoundly. Forgiveness, she realized, wasn't a door you walked through once. It was a hallway you had to keep walking down. That weekend, Arthur showed up with a small stack of board books and a plush giraffe. When Clara laughed and teased him for spoiling Lily, he looked embarrassed. "I didn't know what to bring," he said. "I just wanted to bring something." Then he added more softly, "I missed everything for 6 months. I can't get that time back, but I can try not to miss what's coming." That night, after Lily was asleep, Clara surprised herself by inviting Arthur to dinner. It was a simple meal. Pasta, a salad, tea. But it felt monumental. They ate slowly, talked carefully, and for the first time since the gala, she asked him about his life outside of fatherhood. He told her about the company, how it felt hollow now, how the money and titles didn't hold the same weight. He admitted he'd gone back to the office after the gala and stared at her name in the system for hours. Stunned by the hole he hadn't known was there, he confessed that the day she walked out of his life was the first day he questioned the man he had become. "I was afraid," he said. "Afraid of love, afraid of knowing someone, afraid of not being enough. So I said nothing, and I lost everything, and I've hated myself for it ever since." Clara didn't respond immediately. Her heart ached for the truth, but she also felt something else, a flicker of understanding. Not absolution, not yet, but something softer than anger. As he stood at the door to leave, she said quietly, You're showing up now, and that counts for something." When he left, she stayed at the window longer than usual, and this time, as he disappeared down the street, she didn't feel dread or pain. She felt possibility. Arthur has finally confessed his fears. Do you think Clara's understanding is a sign of forgiveness? Or is there still more work to be done for them to truly heal? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. October bled into November, with a stillness that matched the shift between Clara and Arthur. The leaves turned from vibrant fire to brittle brown, and the air grew sharper, tinged by the arrival of winter. But inside Beth's home, a strange warmth was taking hold in every room. It lived in the soft lullabies Clara sang at bedtime, in the steam rising from cinnamon tea mugs, and in the sound of Lily's giggles bouncing down the hallway like sunshine caught in sound. What had once been temporary, a man showing up each morning, a father learning to live outside the confines of ambition, was now simply life, a shared rhythm, a new normal. Arthur had kept his promise, not with words or grand gestures, but with something far rarer: consistency. He never missed a day, never canceled, never allowed work to consume him again. His world had rearranged itself around Lily's needs and Clara's boundaries. He still ran a company. He still carried the weight of a global empire on his shoulders. But he did it differently now. He brought his laptop to the house. He took meetings in Beth's old sewing room and blocked out time in his calendar for diaper changes and naps. His employees noticed. The media speculated. But he didn't explain. For the first time in his life, he didn't care what the outside world assumed. He wasn't perfect. There were moments of tension, when Lily wouldn't stop crying, and neither of them knew why. When Clara flinched at a tone too much like the old Arthur, or when he caught himself reverting to silence unintentionally. But those moments didn't end in slammed doors or bitter quiet. They ended in apologies, in long walks to clear the air, in small, whispered conversations late at night, once Lily had fallen asleep between them. One Sunday morning, as snow fell softly against the windows, Clara sat on the sofa, in thick socks and a worn sweater, feeding Lily, who now sat up on her own. Arthur was in the kitchen making coffee, stronger than Clara liked, but it had become their ritual. As he moved, humming softly to himself, Clara watched him and realized something she hadn't vocalized. She wasn't waiting for him to leave anymore. The fear was still there, a silent echo in her bones, but it no longer controlled her. He was still here. He had chosen them again and again, not because he felt obligated, but because he wanted to. That difference meant everything. That afternoon, Arthur took them both to the park. Lily, bundled in layers of knit and fleece, had just started taking her first assisted steps, her hands gripping their fingers on either side. She would squeal every time their boots crunched in the snow, and Arthur would laugh with a kind of freedom Clara had never seen in him before. It wasn't the laughter of a man closing a deal or hearing good news. It was lighter, more human. She took his arm without thinking, and he looked at her with quiet, hopeful eyes. Later that night, after Lily was put to bed and the snow grew thicker outside, Clara stood at the living room doorway and watched Arthur adjust the ornaments on the tree he'd helped them decorate the week before. There was something almost absurd about the way he looked in that moment. This man, who had once measured success in acquisition numbers, now crouched beside a lopsided tree, wearing socks with little snowmen on them and humming a carol under his breath. She stepped forward and touched his shoulder. He turned, and she said simply, "Stay." He blinked. he'd heard her correctly. "Tonight?" "No," she said, her voice quiet and certain. "Forever." He didn't speak. Instead, he stood, walked to her, and took her hands. There was nothing grand about his gesture. No ring, no proposal. Just presence. Just honesty. "I wasn't ready when you gave me your heart," he said, "but I've been ready every day since you gave me a second chance." She leaned into him, and for the first time in what felt like years, there was no weight between them. Months later, on a quiet spring morning, they were married in the backyard, surrounded by Beth and a few close friends. Lily toddled around in flower petals in an oversized white dress and stole everyone's attention. There was no orchestra, no press, no spectacle. Just promises exchanged under the sunlight and laughter that lingered in the trees. It wasn't the life Clara had once imagined, but it was real, built not on perfection, but on brokenness, slowly healed by a love that showed up, again and again. And as Arthur leaned down to kiss her hand that night, holding their daughter in his other arm, she knew without a doubt that she had lost nothing after all. She had found everything. What did you think of the ending? Do you believe Arthur and Clara's love story is a testament to second chances, or a reflection of how people truly change? Share your final thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories.